Okay, so welcome back. We're in Bio 212, Anatomy and Physiology 2, Norwalk Community College. And what we're doing now is we're finishing up Chapter 28. And hopefully I'll be able to communicate this clearly enough so that you understand that what Mother Nature is doing to regulate the female reproductive cycle. Your textbook is focusing on the reproductive responsibilities from puberty to menopause. Okay? That's the focus. That's the timeline, if you will. And what they're doing is they are saying that there are two parts to every single regulatory process, right? So there's an ovarian portion and there's a uterine portion. What's going on inside the ovaries and what's happening to the uterus as a result of what's going on inside the ovaries, which means you need to remember that the gonadotrophic releasing hormone, so GnRH, changes. Let's just put increase FSH and LH. And in passing, and because you've read, you know that the amount of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone is going to increase the amount of estrogen. And what we haven't spoken about are what are the other hormones, but estrogen. Okay, I'm just going to put these in shorthand: progesterone, relaxin, and inhibin. And that's only to get us to ovulation. Okay? Fertilization occurs, a whole series of other hormones will need to be considered. But for right now, the ovarian cycle is a series of events in the ovaries that will occur during and after the maturation of an oocyte, meaning the secondary oocyte. And the menstrual cycle is a concurrent series of changes in the uterine endometrium, which is where you need to translate this into epithelia. Okay? For its arrival of the fertilized ovum. Notice this is fertilized ovum. Your textbook, okay, is sort of biasing the way that they're actually looking at how all of these events occur. Okay, let's get out of that. Bam. Okay. Now, sure, they're biasing it, but they're biasing it, I think, probably with good reason. Gonadotrophic releasing hormone is going to be secreted by that hypothalamus. This is something you already know. We've covered it many times. It will cause the release of the follicle-stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. And here's where you need to start paying really close attention. We've already taught you that it's going to stimulate follicular growth. It's also stimulating the ovarian follicles to secrete estrogens. I've already taught you that, right? So let's go like that, go like that, go like that. Luteinizing hormone, which we didn't discuss previously, stimulates the further development of follicles, stimulates them to secrete those estrogens as well. Okay? It's going to stimulate the thecal cells, okay, to produce androgens. Okay? Precursors to give us more estrogens. In fact, they're minimum of 6 different estrogens inside of your body at any given point in time, right? Okay? And it's going to drive ovulation at a specific time inside your cycle. Okay? And what's going to happen as a result of that is it's going to form that corpus luteum, which will then continue to allow for the production of estrogens, progesterone, relaxin, and inhibin. Okay, we'll come back to what those hormones are doing. So you're going to notice that things are about to get very complicated pretty quickly. And I don't mean complicated as in like you can't figure it out. What I mean is there's going to be a series of required steps that actually have to happen. Now, why are those estrogens so important? Well, estrogens secreted are going to drive the development and maintenance of female reproductive structures and secondary sex characteristics, right? So similar to our male reproductive system, right? Remember where you actually had testosterone, you're going to have the requirement of estrogens for these secondary sex characteristics. It increases protein anabolism, okay, including strong bones. Okay, and what I mean by that, of course, is if you decrease estrogens, therefore you decrease strong bones. And that's when everybody asks me, about, what happens as you pass out of, into menopause, rather what actually happens to people's bones. As you need to make more estrogens, you lower blood cholesterol. That means if you have fewer estrogens, you should have higher cholesterol. And as estrogen concentration increases inside the bloodstream, you'd expect to see an inhibit in the release of these 3 hormones. Okay, so think of this as a series of reasoning steps. If we know this happens, what happens here? And if this happens, what happens here? Okay. Progesterone, another water-insoluble hormone. Okay. Go like that. It's secreted by the corpus luteum. It works with estrogens to prepare and maintain the endometrium. So notice, we're telling you that it's a different target now. Okay, for implantation and mammary glands for milk production. And it inhibits the secretion of only these hormones here. So now you actually have something to distinguish. Okay? If I asked you to describe, compare and contrast estrogens and progesterones, how are they the same? How are they different? Why is it important that they're different? Okay? Relaxin. I told you we'd come to this in a moment. Relaxin actually is produced by that corpus luteum, and what it does is it relaxes the uterus by inhibiting contractions of the myometrium. Okay? At the end of pregnancy, it increases pelvic flexibility, okay, and allows for the dilation of the uterine cervix. In fact, maybe you even notice this in your normal monthly cycle. Okay, inhibin is secreted by granulosal cells. So remember where those granulosal cells were found? Okay, remember we saw them inside our follicle. Okay, and it's produced by the corpus luteum, and it's going to inhibit follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And you should be asking yourself, why would Mother Nature be making this? Well, the human body does not withstand multiple pregnancies simultaneously. Okay, everybody's going to say, well, you can have triplets and quadruplets and stuff like that. Yes, and look at the size of each of the individual structures, right? The larger number of offspring you have at a single pregnancy, the smaller their size and their diminished development. So Mother Nature is trying to figure out a way to decrease the likelihood that you have multiparous offspring. Okay, having said that, this is now a figure you can spend some time looking at, right? And what I mean by that is, here's the gonadotrophic releasing hormone, here's the follicle stimulating hormone, here's everything I've already told you multiple times, and here's where the work is. Estrogens promote the development of the female reproductive sex characteristics, no problem. They increase protein anabolism, they lower blood cholesterol, and they moderate these things. These are all things I've already taught you. Now pay attention to, notice that this is the follicular responsibilities. And over here, the corpus luteum is inside yellow. Don't know why they did that, but because the corpus albicans is probably in white. But the idea, of course, is now you're going to actually regulate, if here's follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone here, the consequence of these is that now you have these hormones here. Notice it's relaxin that targets the anterior pituitary gland here. It's the estrogens that target the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland. Don't follow that arrow to the posterior pituitary gland. So similar to the male reproductive system. Things get more interesting, and where you have to do some more thinking is if this is what's happening at the follicle. The consequence of actually having the progesterone and the estrogens inside the circulatory system now, right? Notice I said circulatory system, which means I have to have some binding protein your textbook doesn't even discuss. But notice what happens here is that they drive the proliferative phase and then the secretory phase. Look what's happening here. You have that increase in vasculature. And what's happening is this is the stratum functionalis that's actually growing. And if fertilization occurs, it's maintained. But your textbook focuses on the fact that they give you a 28-day cycle here or something like that. But inside the classroom, you can have somebody on a 14-day cycle. You can have somebody on a 38-day cycle. Makes no difference. Okay? What's going to happen is fertilization will not happen. And what's going to happen then is there's insufficient hormone to maintain this level of stratum functionalis. And then, because there isn't any, what's going to happen is you have a hypoxic environment or anoxic environment, right? And then all of this tissue is going to die. And that's what actually makes up the menstrual phase. So the actual cycle begins at the menstrual cycle, becomes the proliferative cycle, becomes a secretory phase, and then, if fertilization doesn't happen, this is what gets sloughed off. Okay, so having told you that, take a look at the hormones that are regulating it. And it is important that you understand that these are concentration differences that are acting on the tissues inside of the body. And we're focusing on the uterine lining here. Okay? Obviously, luteinizing hormone is targeting other tissues. Think about the mammary glands. We don't talk about that here. This is just what's driving the pre-ovulatory, ovulatory, and post-ovulatory phases. And if you draw lines through this, right, you're going to see the follicle-stimulating hormone starts off the highest. It doesn't stay the highest. In fact, you're going to see progesterone starts off the lowest. And then at some point in time, it wrestles with the concentration here of estrogen. But notice what's driving everything here. Luteinizing hormone drives, draw a line straight up through this, ovulation. Once ovulation occurs, then we actually have this corpus luteum. And because we have the corpus luteum, we now have an increased concentration of progesterone, and we now have an increasing wave of estrogen that had diminished right before the peak of luteinizing hormone. Okay, and this is a very important concept. Mother Nature has figured out a timing mechanism. And the timing mechanism is going to allow for a short window of time, 10 or so days, that will increase the amount of resources that are spent at the uterine lining. Okay? So let's take a look at this. So gonadotrophic releasing hormone releases luteinizing hormone, which brings about the ovulation. That makes sense, right? It's going to cause this thing that's called the corpus hemorrhagicum. Big fancy word for saying we're just going to essentially explode through the ovarian lining here, right? And this is now going to increase the amount of hormones that are going to allow for the maintenance of these tissues. And by maintenance, I mean driving the actual ruptured follicle presentation. Because remember, from here, we're going to now move to the fact that we actually have a corpus luteum that's left behind. Okay, that post-ovulatory phase, okay, is the most constant of all phases. It lasts for about 14 days, okay? And what's going to happen is you're going to secrete those progesterone, estrogens, and relaxins and inhibins, right? And remember, I told you what they were doing a few minutes ago. Seems like a lifetime ago though now while I'm thinking about it, okay? And in the ovarian cycle, this is the luteal phase. So the corpus luteum is the luteal phase. Okay, and let's take a look at what it's actually doing here. And I've already said this a couple different times. Use a series of reasoning steps. If not fertilized. Let's go here like this. Boom. Okay, the corpus luteum lasts for about 2 weeks, degenerates, and then the concentrations go back to a negative feedback system, where the follicular growth resumes and a new ovarian cycle will begin. Okay? If it's fertilized and it lasts more than 2 weeks, we now make a new hormone. Pause. Make sure you understand that. I'm saying we are making a new hormone. That's human chorionic gonadotropin. It's going to be made by the chorion of the embryo, which we get into inside chapter 29. Okay? But that actually is about 8 days after fertilization. Okay? So if you think about all those early pregnancy tests that are out there, what they're doing is, what are there? 3 or 4 different types, maybe four different types of HCG inside the bloodstream. Okay? What they do is they give you the concentration of this so that you can pretty much figure out with certainty if a chorion has been built. So let's wrap this up. Okay, so because if this is what's happening at the corpus luteum, we know we're still inside the ovary. What happens inside the uterus? The progesterone and estrogens produced by the corpus luteum promote the growth of the endometrium, which means they drive epithelial cell growth into the lumen of the uterus. Because the secretory activity of the endometrial glands, it's the secretory phase of the uterine cycle. Notice what I'm doing here. I'm telling you that there are these unique cycles you want to pay attention to. And what's going to happen, of course, is if fertilization does not occur, the levels of progesterone and estrogen decline, and the degeneration of the corpus luteum is causing that. That withdrawal of those hormones stops the development of the endometrial stratum functionalis. That withdrawal of hormone causes the suffocation of the tissue, and that's what actually drives the menstruation. And you can see it in this last figure inside your textbook. And this is, I'll spend a lot of time on this figure inside class, and I'm hoping because you've read the textbook and or you've listened to these, you have a general understanding of what I'm talking about, because there's a lot of information here, right? I want you to see that some of these lines are dashed and some of them are solid. And you're going to notice that what they've tried to do here, for better or worse, is they've tried to tie specific phases to specific colors here, right? And I want you to pay attention to that. But generally speaking, it's a great review for Chapter 18. Gonadotrophic releasing hormone targets the gonadotropes to cause the release of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And then depending on the stage of that secondary oocyte, the mature Graafian follicle gets the highest dosage of luteinizing hormone, ovulation occurs, and then we increase the amount of progesterone, estrogen, relaxin, and inhibin. And what's going to happen here is, as long as this is unfertilized, we're driving the endometrium, namely the stratum functionalis, such that it can be prepared, okay, for a fertilized secondary oocyte to now a zygote to implant. And if it doesn't happen, you stop the secretion of progesterone and estrogens. And this is what shuts off the system, but now allows follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone to be released again. Okay? So that's a lot. That's a lot to think about for both the male and the female reproductive systems, because really all we've done at the end of this, right, is made this available such that if one of these is in the area, right, top hat on you. That's supposed to be a top hat. Well, it's a bad cartoon. Hopefully I'll draw a better one inside class, right? If one of these is available, now fertilization can occur, and it's an if-then, okay? If fertilization occurs, then we maintain this. If fertilization doesn't occur, then we allow for the hypoxic environment to now take apart the endometrium, and that's what actually causes menstruation, okay? So I'll see you guys in class, and hopefully you'll come with questions, okay?